Hello Kotliners. Kotlin 2.4 got released, and honestly it is packed with huge changes to Kotlin programming language, changes that we haven't seen in Kotlin for, for many years. So in this and upcoming videos I would like to present those key new features. Most of them are still experimental, but most of them are already stable. And soon they are going to be visible in real life projects and they will start influencing our projects. In today's video, I would like to start on context parameters. Context parameters is a very old feature. It got introduced as an experimental feature years ago, but over years it undergo many changes. In Kotlin 2.4, this feature is finally stable, which changes a lot. And it has a new feature in its API, which I will discuss at the end. So let's start from introducing context parameters and explaining what are they for. I would like to start from the most beloved Kotlin feature, the feature that Kotlin is famous for, extension functions. Extension functions are functions that are defined in a special way, so it can be called on objects instead of with an object passed as an argument. So if we had a regular parameter, this is how we would call this function, but extensions are called on values instead of with values as an argument. That's the key difference. Extension functions are an amazing feature for defining utils, and most functions from standard library and from many external libraries are defined as extensions, which is very, very idiomatic in Kotlin. The thing is that extension functions are also used for other purposes, and those purposes are more controversial, let's say. So first of all, extension functions are basis for modern DSLs. If you wanted to define, let's say, HTML builder, that would be based on DSL. This HTML function creates calls a lambda, which passes some type as a receiver. Yeah, this HTML passes this HTML builder as a type. Then if we wanted to define an internal function, that would be an extension function on this HTML builder. All is based on extensions. This isn't what extensions were made for. Also, if you wanted to pass something implicitly, like this logging context, I don't think you should do that. I think this would be actually considered an anti-pattern, but this conceptualizes the idea of implicitly passing some values. With extensions, we don't consider it to be a very good idea. The last thing, extensions, sometimes we need to have kind of an extension on multiple things. Yeah, when you want to launch a coroutine on a scope, you use a function like launch or async. Launch is an extension function on a coroutine scope. When you want to call something on a flow, you also use extension function on a flow. But what if you wanted to call a function that should be both called on a flow, because it's a flow operator doing something with a flow, and on a scope, so two receivers at the same time? Well, we cannot do that with extensions. You can only have extension function on one thing. So we need to define a scope when one thing is passed as a receiver, like this in here. This is how launch in is defined. So this would be a definition of launch in. We will get back to that later. It's be called on this scope and this scope. We cannot do that easily with extensions, and that has always been a limitation. And this is precisely where extension parameters help us. This isn't an original Kotlin feature. It is taken from Scala. This is how we define context parameters. We define this context block. Inside of it, we define parameters, and this parameter can be called explicitly. So we can call something from this parameter explicitly. A value for foo should be defined as a receiver. You can either use this context block that passes this value. This works just like a with block that would work the same. Of course, inside foo you also have a receiver of type foo, so you can context of type foo, so you could also call foo. Of course, that would be a recursive call, but I hope you see the point. So this is how you can do that. What is also important is that in a context with a specific type, you can call another function with this context. So let's say context call foo2. Call foo2 can be called explicitly. We don't need to add a context block around it. So this parameter, even if no one really uses that, can be useful because it is passed forward to another function. We cannot call it implicitly, but we can pass it implicitly. This is how it works, and this is actually quite nice. Of course, we can have multiple context parameters. We have such an example in here. We have this call foo_bool that expects both foo and bool, and we can provide foo and bool in any order that changes absolutely nothing. Both will work. Now, what is this feature for? Let's get back to our examples, and I will discuss them from the bottom to the top. So let's get back to our flow. Instead of launching this, we could pass this scope as a context. Now we don't need to pass it. We can call this one, maybe we can rename it, maybe launch, and that is probably clear enough. Without scope, we cannot call it because it expects a scope. I hope this is clear. With scope, we can call it. So this is how it works. Flow should be an extension in this case because, well, we want to call it on a flow, not with a flow as a context. So this is perfectly fine this way. If this were some Android or Compose multi-platform, instead of passing a scope, which would be probably hard because we're likely wanted to pass some view model scope or lifecycle scope, we can define an extension on a view model. I have some base view model here, fake view model scope. And on this view model, we could just call view model scope and launch. And that would be also an idiomatic way to launch a coroutine, launch a flow in an asynchronous coroutine on the view model scope. We can give it a better name to make it more explicit. Launch in view model. Maybe that would be more reasonable. I would need to think more to figure out a better name. Passing values implicitly. I am still not sure about it. I'm not a big fan of such tricks, but I guess there are cases where you might want to pass things implicitly now. You can do that with the context parameters. And of course, passing, going from a function to a function is very, very simple because you can pass this context implicitly many layers from the top to the bottom without any explicit call, which makes it much more convenient to pass things this way. And DSLs, for DSLs, we can and probably should do the same. And here we can use HTML builder inside of it. Well, if head were on a context, which probably it should be, that would be enough. If it isn't, I can do it like that. But very likely it would be better if head were a context and our whole builder were context parameter based. That would simplify many things. Now this can be just called implicitly and everything works perfect. Context parameters also allow us to define things like this unary plus on a body builder. Notice that this function requires both receivers, both body builder and string. We couldn't do that previously without defining it in a body of a body builder. Now we can do it, at least for as long as those elements are public. We can define it on a context of a body builder, and thanks to that, we could have it defined wherever we want, and it should work. So DSL definitions has changed; they are more flexible, and I guess they will evolve in the future. Now, a new feature that I briefly announced. This feature isn't yet supported by currently available IntelliJ, so I won't be able to show it to you. But it is announced that context parameters, we will be able to pass them in a similar way as we pass arguments, which might make it a little bit strange that this same way we can pass both actual arguments and context parameters. But at the same time, it might be an answer to many of requests that we had many people demanded a way to implicitly pass values. Here we go. We can pass it implicitly. We can pass it explicitly if you prefer. We have flexibility. Many people demanded arguments that cannot be passed by position, but they must be passed by name. So here you go. Context parameters cannot be passed by position. They must be passed by name or implicitly by context. That might be a nice fit for some kinds of arguments that might not be passed explicitly. How is it going to influence Kotlin project? Honestly, I'm not sure. It is hard to predict. Because seeing that, I can easily imagine many crazy things that people might do with this new feature, but it might also be very helpful in some specific use cases. So I can't wait to see how is it going to work out for us as a community. But for now, I hope you deepened your understanding on this new feature, and that it won't surprise you if you see it in another project. That's it for today. Thank you, folks, and see you on another video.